everyone, it's Morgan. So this is going to be a really tough album of the week to talk about. This coming Friday, October 9th, would have been John Lennon's 80th birthday. And Lennon left us much too early for us to really know what the total impact that he was going to have was. But what he did accomplish in his 20 years in music was really amazing. Now, I considered choosing a Beatles album for this, but we've already talked about three of them, and really the three best of them all, with Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper. So I thought I would go back to his 1971 album called Imagine. And this isn't an album that truly changed music in the sense that we normally talk about these albums, but it did have one song that I think has had one of the longest lasting impacts on music, which is the title track itself, Imagine. And I'm not going to get into it. Listen to it so that you make out of it what you want to make out of it. Okay? Now, another track on the album that is really good is called Jealous Guy. And I first heard that not actually as a Lennon recording, but when Brian Ferry from Roxy Music covered it. And he even played that at Live Aid in 1985, which is a really, really good track. So Lennon, at this point in his career, he had left the Beatles in 1970, and he and Yoko Ono were collaborating on a lot of music. She did not have as big an influence on this album as on some of the others, but you definitely will still hear her there. I remember the day that Lennon was shot as if it were yesterday. It was December 1980, and I was in the living room of my parents' house, sitting on the floor having a phone conversation with a friend, and my dad came in. It was a Monday. And he interrupted me and he said, "I'm watching football." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." He said, "Howard Cosell, who was the broadcaster for Monday Night Football, famous sports broadcaster, just came on and said that John Lennon's been shot and he's dead." So I kind of ended the phone call and went to go watch the news. This was before internet or anything like that. And there wasn't a whole lot going on, so I turned on the radio. It was a station here in Los Angeles called KMET. It was at 94.7, doesn't exist anymore. And the broadcaster, the disc jockey, was Jim Ladd. And if you want to hear him today, he's on Sirius XM radio. And he was talking about it, and man, it really had an impact. I remember the next day at school, a whole lot of people being dressed up like Lennon, and a lot of people talking about their music, and my friends that used to bring guitars to school were singing Lennon songs and Beatles songs. Lennon had just released a new album, just maybe a month or two before this. He'd had a 5-year hiatus from music, and he was being basically a house husband and helping to raise his son Sean, his youngest son. And one day he actually heard the Paul McCartney song Coming Up. And it was the first song that McCartney had released in that time period that Lennon thought was a really good song. And he said, "Okay, I'm inspired. I can get back into writing." And then he had done something, and this struck home with me because it is very much like me. He'd been on a sailing trip. The English love their sailing trips. And they sailed from up on the East Coast, okay, all the way down to the Caribbean and the Bahamas, basically. And a terrible storm whipped up, and a lot of people that were on the trip were incapacitated with seasickness and the such. And Lennon said he was scared to death, but he was the one who was steering the boat and doing the sailing. And he said that experience really motivated him, that it was the inspiration, it was the time for him to get back into the studio. He went into the studio. It was very secret. Not a lot of people knew about it. The studio musicians he had were amazing. And when I look back on it now, it's stunning. I mean, one of my heroes of bass playing, a guy named Tony Levin, drummer named Jim Keltner, who's really good, and then a drummer named Alan White was involved a little bit, who ended up with Yes, okay? And Levin has admitted that when he was getting ready to join King Crimson in 1980, and he had, was signing a contract at that point, to work with Lennon, and, would the two things balance out? There was a stipulation in the contract that said this contract null and void if Lennon returns to Apple Records, which was the company the Beatles had founded. And what the implication was there was that Lennon's going out on his own, except there's the possibility of a Beatles reunion. And they've dodged the questions over the years, but have basically, through hints and that they've dropped, the four of them were talking about reuniting in the early 80s. I'm sure Ringo Starr would have been in for it. Paul McCartney had mended his relationship with Lennon. There's a very famous story about him being at Lennon's New York residence, and Saturday Night Live, this was like late 1970s, the producer of Saturday Night Live, Lorne Michaels, made a joke because George Harrison was on the show that night. He held up $3,000 in cash and said, "I'm offering right now $3,000 for the Beatles to reunite." And I mean, it was a joke because that was just, nothing money. They would have gotten millions upon millions for reuniting. But Lennon and McCartney saw it, and they actually considered going down to the studio just as a joke to show up, to claim their part of the money. And I mean, that night, there was a chance, because from what I've been told, Ringo Starr was in New York at the time too, that there could have been an impromptu Beatles reunion on Saturday Night Live during the late 70s, and that would have been amazing. So I want you to listen to some John Lennon. I chose Imagine, the album that came out in 1980, Double Fantasy, had some good tracks on it and some terrible tracks, but I remember hearing them on the radio every day when I was in junior high and high school. I was in the 9th grade when Lennon passed away, and it really was just the soundtrack of that part of my life. I'd been a pretty big Beatles fan, and I liked the solo work, but Lennon was hitting it new again. That was just really wonderful. Okay, so please check this out. If you don't want to listen to Imagine, listen to Double Fantasy, listen to Milk and Honey, okay, listen to any of these things. You won't find live performances online. In fact, after the Beatles quit touring, I think Lennon only really appeared on stage once, and that was at an Elton John concert. And it was because he had made a bet with Elton when Elton played piano on one of his songs that, if Elton said the song is going to be great, and Lennon's like, "Nah, it won't." And they said, "Okay, well, if it hits number one or charts or something like that, said, you're going to have to come on stage and play a few songs with me." And they did it at Madison Square Garden. They say Lennon was scared to death, a lot of stage fright. But, Elton got him out there, and apparently it was just a really amazing experience to see. And that was pretty much his last big live performance, except for, maybe playing in front of some family members or someday out in Central Park singing for one of his kids. Okay, thanks for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy this. John Lennon, check it out. This is Morgan signing off.